Also pretty bad.
Yeah. So first thing first we're going to be looking at is some basic interaction with Node. So when we have Node installed, we can in our command line just type Node, and it'll basically just write out this tiny little thing over here. But then we can actually start just executing JavaScript right now. Basically the same thing as our browser terminal. So we can do console.log hello world, and it'll log out hello world and return undefined. Basically the exact same thing you would see in your browser. We can also, as usual in the browser, we can add numbers together, we can divide them, blah 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 blah. You have seen this 1,000 times before in the browser. So everything, any JavaScript command you can do in the browser will work here. But you do not have access to things like DOM. You do not have access to fetch, because that's actually defined as part of the DOM specification. So they will not work in NodeJS. To get out of it, you type .exit, not just exit, .exit, and it'll exit it. So, assuming that we have a JavaScript file like I just created before, we can go in and say, alright, let's just, now that is more than enough zoom for everyone. So, just go into project, and then we can copy path. They changed this in the latest version. Thank you. So, if we switch into the path where I just have that Node JavaScript file I created a moment ago, to execute an existing JavaScript file, so in this case you can see that's the content we have in it, you just type node main.js and it'll run it and then stop. In this case, because there's nothing more happening, we didn't put up any event listeners or anything, so it'll just run to the end and then stop.
What if you have something else inside of it, and like you say, fetch or DOM something?
Like then you would actually have some events and it would wait for those. Usually you have you would, once we get into how to set up the web server, which will be in about 3 minutes or so, okay. Then we'll be looking at something that'll actually keep this running. But right now I just want to show you this is how you make a program and then run it, because it's actually not that difficult. Which is one of the nice things with Node, you don't really have to set up a whole bunch of 200 million different things that works in different ways. So this is some basic application model. Before we actually start talking too much about it, let's actually just look into how can we set up an HTTP server so it actually does something. So in Node, if we want to, there's a lot of different modules we can get. So for example, to get a module, we use this require function, which will, in essence, go out and load the specified module for you and then make it available. So you can see I have all sorts of things available here. So basically I can start listening for whenever something comes in at hello, I want a return. So request dot, and this is really low level and really annoying to use. So that's why we will not be using it for very long, but just so you get an idea of how. Just consent. No one uses the native module because it's so horrible.
What module is that?
The native HTTP module. They use something like Express.
Oh yeah, Express.js, yeah.
Because actually writing something back correctly is challenging. It's been so long since I used it that I actually can't remember it. But one thing that Node has that's really good is its documentation. It'll basically list all the methods available for us. Is it not called is it called HTTP server? What is in the HTTP module? It's just really annoying to use. So there's an example. As mentioned, really good docs. Not that great to use directly. We don't care about this one. This is just error handling. Who cares about errors? So we can do rest dot. Swear to God, it's called send. All right, it's also an option. I hate this module. It's like, who decided that just replying to a network call should be this? So it is response.write. Hello from the node server. So if we just run this now, I don't use the command line, I just run it directly. We'll see a whole lot of nothing written here. But if we go to a terminal, and use something like curl http localhost 8000, it should, in theory, do something.
Was that 8080 or was it 8000?
Oh yeah, 8000, I'm sorry. Good catch. And you can see it writes hello from the node server. And I can change this and then blah 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 blah. Run it again. Yes, please make sure to actually stop it. And then it says, alright, now hello from the node server too. But we can also, if we don't feel so inclined to use a command line, we can also just do it in our browser. So we can go localhost 8000 and voila. It writes out hello from the server. But this is a really annoying module to use. As you can probably see, it took me going through the documentation twice to actually find the correct command to write something back. And now, what if I wanted to do something whenever it came in on specifically index.html, I wanted to return something different? Well, I can, down here somewhere, I can find the URL, which is called rec.url. I can basically log out. So what does the request come in at? You see it writes something down here. So that came in at a slash. So what if I request index.html? It'll write out index.html. So I can say, so if request.url is equal to index.html, then I want to do something like this, else like that, and run it again, and it just gets really unwieldy and annoying to deal with. I hope you can see it, the text, or at least see that it's different. But as mentioned, one of the really nice things about the NodeJS is that there are a lot of modules available. So if we go back into our command line here, and I actually think I can make the command line itself bigger, which will probably help a bit. Boom. Yes, and it's no longer all blurry. So if we want to pull in dependencies, we have this, there's this whole thing called npm, which has a lot of modules. And like, you'll never actually see the front page, but there is a very nice module called Express, which, as you can probably see from the number over here, gets downloaded about 10 million times a week, which is a lot.
Weekly downloads.
Yes, weekly.
Weekly.
And now you add in the fact that it has existed for many years, and you get a very big number. So if you want to install that, we first need to initialize the terminal. Correct? Terminal will help. So if we want to actually do this, we need to actually first initialize our project as a Node.js project. And the way we do that is we do npm init. It'll ask us a whole bunch of questions, and rather than me actually figuring out what to answer, I'll just write OK to all of them. And then if we look in here, we'll actually have a main.js, which we all know from web store. And we'll also have the file it just created is called the package.json. That contains information about the project that we're working on right now, such as what version is it, what's the name, which file to actually run to start the project. But it can also contain dependencies. The way we install dependencies is we do npm install, the name of the dependency, dash, I think it's capital S.
You should do that now.
I would recommend, if you want to follow it right along.
So nb.
So you can see down here, it added in Express, it pulled in another 50 packages from 37 people. So now you have the power of 37 people at your hands, if you want that, which is nice. So if we look at the package.json again, we can see that now it actually lists Express as a dependency. So rather than now doing all of this absolutely horrible thing, we can go, well, Express is equal to require Express. And then we can do, I think it's app equal Express. That'll get us an app module. And here we can say app dot. So where it's called .get. App.get. WebStorm can't you figure out the IntelliSense. So when something called in comes in at index.html, we get a request and a response. And for the response we say, alright, just send back hello index.html. If something comes in at just slash, we get again those, and we say rest.send hello from not index.html. And then to start it, we do app.listen, tells it what port to listen on, 8000, and we should be good to go. So we run that. It says again absolutely nothing, but if we go over here and log, we can see that it logs out hello from not index.html. I can route out the index.html and it gets me that. And I mean, this is much easier to read, isn't it?
Yeah. Just like npm install express, what was the last?
So this?
Dash S, yeah.
Yeah. So if you just do npm install express, that'll work, but it will not update the package.json, which means that when I get your code and I need to run it, it will not include the dependencies it needs.
What is the dependencies for?
So dependencies says when I need to commit all this thing to Git, if I just do git status now, it'll tell me that I have, okay, that's actually ignored here, but I should not there is this folder down here called node modules, which is huge. Not sure if this works. So you can see this is all the folders that are in node modules right now. And those were just installed, just came there because I just wrote npm install express. And I don't want to ship this to Git whenever we need this, because we might not need this every time. So rather than actually including all of node modules, we just specify in here that this package requires express. So if I go and remove the whole node modules folder, like that, you'll see there's no more node modules folder. Then I can just do npm install, and it'll look into my package.json and figure out what packages I need, and then they are installed again. So you can see express should be in here somewhere. Yes, express. So that allows us to have enough information to recreate all the things this module needs to be able to run, rather than you having to actually write down on a note. So every time you install this, you need to run npm install express and npm install MySQL and npm install whatever else I need. And because usually you end up needing like 20, 30 to 100 dependencies. And if you had to write all of those down manually, it would be really, really annoying. And also because sometimes new versions of these things come out. So it says right here that this specifically uses 4.17.1 or a newer version if available. Specifically if there's a new version with this number. No, just eat.
A question, Rasmus.
Yes.
The reason why we're using Node.js is because we want to put our website into the server. Is that it?
And you could do that using something like Apache or Nginx. What Node.js allows us to do is more advanced interactions. Like it actually allows us to interact with the database, which we'll be looking at, I think, not next module, but the module after. So that's going to be the first module after the Christmas vacation.
So that's the reason why we're tackling Node.js, because our website needs to deal with database and we need this.
Yes. And I mean, we could have worked with anything. We could have worked with C#, Java, Go, Rust, C++, assembly, whatever the heck you wanted on the server. We just picked Node because it's JavaScript, and you guys already know JavaScript, so you don't have to learn another programming language, which is easier. And I mean, Node.js is actually pretty fast. There are faster things available, but for all intents and purposes, it's more than good enough.
But it's not a replacement for Apache or any Kinix. How do you say that one?
Nginx.
Nginx. Yeah.
I mean, that depends on what you're using it for. Nginx or Apache is really good at just serving files. You just have, like, these are my static files, there's an image here, a JavaScript file there, and an index.html here. They are much better than what you can do. They're much more optimized for that. If you want to use something like PHP, you also need something like Nginx or Apache to actually run that.
Because they have libraries that comes with it.
Yeah, it's because there needs to be something that... There it was. Because, like, they can actually translate the HTTP call into something that can work with PHP. If you're using C# before, it's no longer a problem. You needed something called Internet Information Server on Windows, which is a horrible, horrible application.
I've worked with that before.
Yeah. It's there, it's a thing, it works.
Still, like, even then, they're just using C# for the backend language.
I'm sorry, what?
They're still using the C# mostly for the server.
But that depends entirely on the company. Like Google, for example, they use Java, C++, and Go for their servers. Facebook uses PHP, or a version of PHP called Hex. But so it very much depends on the company. Microsoft, of course, uses C# for a lot of theirs.
But also, Node is also the I don't know. It's a question. It's the most like appropriate to use with React and Vue and all that kind of stuff.
Because it doesn't matter what your server is in, because you're just going to be sending JSON back and forth.
Okay.
And practically everything nowadays can send JSON. There's almost nothing that can't. So it doesn't matter what your server is in. You can do the client in JavaScript and the server in C#. I mean, it's a personal preference most of the time, but there are practical reasons for picking one language over another on the server maybe. For example, when you use Go, you just get a single exe file you just run. When we use Node, I actually have to send this entire folder to the server and then run that. Python, same thing. In PHP, you would also need to send up a lot of files. So it's just a trade-off of what you're working with. Sometimes there might be a library available for Node that makes it very easy for you. Sometimes that library is only available for Java, and then you'll do it in Java. So it's very much, what do you like working in? And are there certain cases that means that you need to use one language or the other? Beforehand, if you wanted to run on Linux, you couldn't really use C# because there was nothing that could host C# web servers on Linux. That's no longer a problem with .NET Core, but back when we had .NET Framework, that was a problem.
Now, if you want to set a server as a node server, should be separated server or can be apart from other server?
Well, the thing is, you need them to listen on some port, and usually you want them to listen on port 80, and there's only one program that can listen on port 80 at a time on a server.
SSH? No.
HTTP. SSH is 22.
22, yeah.
And you actually also want to listen on 443, but that's for HTTPS. So usually if you need to run more Node applications on the same server, you will actually use something like Nginx or Apache, that then when they get the request in on port 80, they'll forward it to your Node server on another port, which is basically how .NET does it on IIS, and has always done it. is that they'll just forward it to the actual program behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's what they call
Reverse proxying.
virtual hosting on Apache, I think.
Virtual hosting is just we can have multiple servers.
Yeah.
So when they actually forward it to something else behind the scenes, for example, to an actual node server, that's what we call a reverse proxy.
Reverse proxy.
But like you can have one of your virtual hosts be a reverse proxy and the other not be.
Yeah.
So, I think you should start just playing a bit with this, typing it out, if you haven't already followed along, because that'll probably raise a couple of more questions as we go on. And then we'll also be looking at like how do we actually make our own modules in Node, and then go into a bit more. So where would we use Node on the server? How does it work together with our database? More whiteboard drawing.